All right, you guys. So my name is Shawn. I'm a Houston-based food photographer. I have 15 years in the food. I have 15 years in the food business. I have a RIM degree and been a full-time food photographer for about 6 years now. Always been a passionate photographer, passionate foodie, blended the two. So thanks again for having me. We're going to go through let me get a show of hands to who's overwhelmed by photography and social media. A couple people. The rest of you kind of moderately know what you're doing? No, not at all. Okay. Who really thinks they know a lot but want to learn some more tips? Okay, cool. And who already has a food truck? Okay, cool. All right, so we have a couple of topics. We're going to have plenty of time for questions because I know I want to answer direct, and I'll be available afterwards as well. So let's go over the first topic of three. What's a snapshot versus a quality photo? A snapshot is like, let's just get this real quick. Let's get this image of this room, and you're kind of like barely even standing still, and you kind of get it, and you move on, right? An image, a nice image, is where you really think about what story am I trying to tell. So I might think I'm trying to really get a feel for the room. So I don't want too much of the ceiling or the floor. I really want to maximize the frame. I want to fill the frame with content. So the same thing with like food right here. This is actually a food truck item. And basically I found some nice shade. We'll go over lighting in a minute, but basically I wanted to fill the frame, as they say, fill the frame with the subject. The real subject is the sandwich. It's like a Hawaiian, kind of a fun waffle thing. The onion rings are to the side. They're kind of blurred out, but the sandwich is really the hero. So we don't need a bunch of other stuff. We don't need the whole truck. If you try to get the whole shot in the picture of the truck, and you have to kind of make decisions. Okay, so if you're really trying to, for you guys, I would say most of your images are food, maybe a couple are of the truck, some of you, your customers, but decide per post what you're going to photograph. In this case, it's the food. So you can really, you only have so much room in that frame. So you want to kind of maximize. That's how you make punchy, impactful photos. You really think about, you don't make it small. Okay. This is another good idea for how to compose food truck content. Okay. Hands. People are always very, social media. A lot of posts do well when people are in the photos. I will tell you that. Now, I didn't need to get his face, because if you get the whole person's body, how big is the food going to be? Pretty small, right? So, but it shows a human element, which is natural. I mean, I didn't style this. I just actually, it was my friends. I wasn't paid to take this photo. It was me enjoying myself at a food truck thing. And, but you can really tell what it is. And that's what I'm always trying to do, is really, if I have a complicated dish, there's a lot going on there. But what I can see is that if you really look, you can see there's meat. And another rule I have is, if there's the most expensive ingredient in the dish, you need to be able to see that. If it's chicken, beef, pork, if it's tofu, whatever, and you need to see what you're buying. You need to be able to communicate that first, and then kind of artfully second, if that makes sense. In this case, not everything needed to be in focus. Okay, like the pepper in the back. You're selling this. This is what you're really looking at: meat, vegetables, sauce. Boom. Okay. This was at a barbecue competition, and I was just walking around, and something like this, we're going to talk about lighting and editing, but getting the right exposure, okay? Making sure you have the correct focus to where usually the front should be in focus, not the back, little things like that. Pizza photo. This is an Indian pizza, kind of a fusion place in Houston. Chinese food. This is a good example for you guys. Another human element. Um, yeah, go ahead. Good question. Okay, so her question was, should you put the food item in the container it's served in, or maybe something else? Is that correct? So I would say, if everything's served in styrofoam, I've always told clients it doesn't. I have taken photos like that, but I would say for your social media, maybe have a plate like something simple. I wouldn't have like an extravagant plate. I would have like just something simple to where it's not distracting. Something to where it doesn't pull away. You know. Now, what I do tell most of my clients is, um, don't overpromise. Like if you get this much fries, a handful of fries, I'm not going to photograph twice as much. So you don't want to overpromise. That's very key because you don't want to get a bunch of Yelp reviews or whatever. But yeah, you can. I think it's flexible. Like a lot of my clients have plastic ramekins for sauces. Sometimes we use something else. It doesn't have to be totally literal. Okay, and I'm gonna skip around just a little bit, but this brings up lighting. This is a good example of being outside. You guys have the biggest problem I would say for you guys from a professional standpoint is the lighting. Where do I even take these photos? Now, I know a lot of food trucks have a shelf, maybe you have a table. My biggest advice for where to take the photos is have a little table, have a shelf by your truck. In this case, it was a table next to a truck, and it was hard sunlight, okay? There's two types of light, hard light and soft light. This is hard light, that means big shadows, okay? And that could be okay. So if you're on a sunny day and you got this special and you're like, I got to get this out there, I got to promote this dish, but the lighting is so harsh, that's okay, but just be conscious of where your shadows are falling. You don't want a big shadow across the middle. Most of the time, you want the light from the side. Now, if you want to get advanced, you can have it from the back, but that's, for the most part, most food images are lit from the side. And maybe a little bit, not just the side, but a little bit in front so you can get that front right there. Okay, guys? See, this is the brightest point, and that's the shadow point. So it's coming from this way. Okay? In this case, this was, well, let me show you. And the next one was in a restaurant. This is soft light. This is in a restaurant with a window, and it's very soft. You can barely see the shadows. And it's kind of, a lot of times I work with what I'm given. So this is it. It's not a bad. It's just as good. It's just a different type of light. So how that applies to you guys is you might. A lot of times the best light is soft light. Okay. So you have an overcast day, not too dark, hopefully, but it's a little bit. Maybe there's an awning or something, and it creates like an even, and that can be nice. Okay. You just gotta make sure it's not too dark when you edit. Does that make sense? Good question. So her question was, should you have a specific time? Should you stage it? I would say you guys are so busy. I mean, it's going to be kind of personal, but one of my big one of my big points in all of this, and what I do for every time I go to a gig, you know, I talk to the chefs, the line cooks. Hey, we need to be very deliberate. And so if you don't have the time to build that sandwich slowly and carefully, like for instance on this one, I gave it a quick look, And I'm like, hey, I'm not going to be able to see too much inside that thing. I got to take the bun off a little bit, and then so I can see the bacon and the cheese, you know. So they might not even serve it like that. They might have the bun all the way on the top. So if you don't have the time to kind of think about things, then just do it another time. Um, but that's my other big point. Be deliberate. Let me get back to you in 1 second. So this is a good example right here. This is something that would. This is a shawarma, I think it's called. This is something that would normally be hard to photograph because all you see is tortilla, you know. So it's like, first thing I did, I'm gonna try to bear with me here, guys. You want to hold it? Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So the first thing I did was I asked. He just handed me this, just this, in a wrap. He didn't cut it or anything. So the first thing I did was I asked for one of these, and then I had him cut it. And then normally this is how you would stack something like this: one down, and then one kind of up like that. Now, if I really wanted to get fancy, you have to be showing the inside. You can't just, you know. So the point is that I would pull some of this out a little bit and make sure you see what's in there, okay? And then I propped it up with these chips, okay? 1 sec. And maybe even add another piece or two. That I don't think that's cheating, okay? It's just a piece of lettuce, okay? But you want to fill that up. Every time I shoot tacos, burritos, we usually cut it and then we stuff it with real fresh ingredients. And that's a big key, you guys. When I say be deliberate, use fresh ingredients. Don't use pico de gallo you chopped up 4 days ago. Use a sharp knife. That's a huge tip because smashed up tomatoes look bad. Okay. Um, I know we're covering a lot, so um, anyway, thank you so much. Sandwiches are tough, you know, but you gotta at least, you might not see both of the insides. Like this is the sandwich, and then you cut it. Maybe you open it. You're either going to show them both open ends, or you stack it. You just want to make sure they can see it. Okay. Hope that helps. There's another good example. Okay. This was for a food truck, and I brought my own table, and I brought this. This is a kind of a cool tip. This is wood flooring for a house. I bought 5 panels. Right, you buy them in like a package, and anyway, I just put the wood paneling, the interlock, right, on top of a table, so it wasn't like a plastic table. It looked a little more interesting, and I found some nice even light, so it wouldn't be. Sometimes these harsh shadows can be distracting. So anyway, and you know, this is that's basically what I would try to do with this. You know, everything is showing. The chips don't need to be. You can cut off the chips a little bit. Nobody needs to see all the chips. You know, you don't want to take away from the shawarma or whatever that was. Some of these don't apply to you guys, so you can show your ingredients. If you go to farmers markets, and what's like show ingredients, um, cooking. Anytime you have a action, you're working with cool grill shots. Try to capture that. You know, another big tip is to what angle do I shoot these things at? That's kind of overwhelming. The way I look at it is kind of like you'd photograph a person or a building, or even this. Let's look at this. How am I going to shoot? How am I going to photograph that? You're not going to shoot this from above. You can't see what that is. Now, a pizza, you can shoot a pizza from above, or you can shoot a pizza at like a 45-degree angle, but you can't shoot a pizza at the same level of a pizza. So usually food photography is shot straight on for like a burger, okay? Because you can really see it, or 45 is real common. And then for things that are flat, you can go above. That makes sense? Okay. So that's the angles. We covered lighting, angles, keeping it simple. Here's a good burger shot, okay? So again, when you're building these things, let's talk about being deliberate. You know, you're used to cranking these things out really quick, right? But when you're making these photos, if you don't have the time, maybe don't do it, because I want to make sure there's no black spots on the lettuce. That's very common. On the avocado. And you really want to look at it. You wouldn't believe how many times I have to remind chefs and even good quality chefs to slow down and let's really think about this. And so you can see, and this is a little bit pixelated on the screen, so forgive me on that. But you can see beef, cheese, bacon, egg, and I even did another shot that you might have seen. This egg was so cool, I even took off the bun, and you can see the egg better. You saw that? Okay. Thank you very much. That was at some fancy restaurant. Try to find some more relevant to you guys. Again, that this is soft light. You know, there's not a lot of harsh shadows. It's there's you can tell where the light's coming from because this is the only shadow I see. So the main light's coming from this side. Again, side light. You know, and the reason that works is because it's been done for hundreds of years or thousands of years. You know, if you look at old paintings, still life photography, it's all done with a window. There's a window right here, and the food or the spread, and that's it. And that's what usually works. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. You guys don't have a building, but you have the sun right there, and you have a table. Okay. Let's talk about editing real quick. Um, first thing, and there's lots of ways to edit. You know, programs. I'm not familiar with Samsung or anything, Android, but with the iPhones, the native editing app works pretty well. Um, and if you go into the many options, the first thing I do when I edit is get the exposure correct. And the exposure is how light versus dark the photo is. And you basically want to move that little cursor until the overall image is fairly bright, but the whitest part is not too white and what they call overexposed or blown out. You you can still see lines in the onion. Okay, in this white part you can still see detail. So you want to you want your food photos to be bright. Okay, you want them to be bright, colorful, natural. You know, none of this like darker food photos. That's kind of like artsy. Okay, we're trying to sell something, and it needs to be bright and clear. Again, so with this one, there's a lot of white going on, but the white isn't. You can still see detail in the white, like in the cheese over there. If it was rice, because if you look at like rice is a good example. If it's too bright, it's just going to be a white blob, right? You want to be able to see grains. Okay, so that's number one when editing. Number two is what's called the white balance. The white balance is what makes the photo more blue versus orange. Okay, so basically what you're looking for, especially with food, you don't want to be blue at all. Okay, if anything, a little bit warm or orange, because blue is not appealing. There's hardly any blue foods. It's debatable, blueberries. But besides blueberries, blue is an appetite suppressant. That's a tip I'll give you. Blue is literally an appetite suppressant. You look at all the major chains, and they're not using a bunch of blue inside the building. They want you to eat. They want you to order dessert. You know, so it's okay if you have blue shirts. It's fine. But the point is that you want to have warmer images, and I'll try to show you a better example of that. Once you open the editing app, you'll realize what I'm talking about. You just move that slider, and you kind of want to find a natural color. You know, as soon as you see, and the easiest way to know if you've gone wrong is to kind of go to the extreme and dial it back slowly. Go to each extreme. Play around with these editing apps and go to each end of the one second. Go to each end of the slider and see what it does. And okay, that's making it more blue. That's making it more orange. Just dial it back a little bit towards neutral. Okay, and if anything, a little bit warm. When I say warm, I mean a little bit orange. And granted, these aren't orange, but they're not blue at all. The white is white. That's the easiest way to say it. White things should be white. Here's a good action shot. This is in Chicago, and I was a customer, and I got that standing in line. It's like a famous place, whatever. Um, that brings up a topic real quick. You know, well, let me hold off on that. Do you have a question, sir? Yeah. So, what kind of phone do you have? Okay. So, editing apps is this question. What do I recommend? I say keep it simple. I'm sure Android has a good native app. Once you take a photo, in the upper right hand corner, I know an iPhone, I think it's upper right hand. It's one of the corners, and it says, you tap on it, it says edit. I would use the native app. Now, if you want to get more complicated and a little bit more fine tuned, Lightroom, Lightroom Mobile. That's in the Adobe suite. If you've ever heard of Photoshop, Lightroom is like Photoshop's brother, and you pay like $10 a month. Um, you want to take video? The most popular app is CapCut. CapCut. Um, but nowadays, I use the native app just for most stuff. You don't get too complicated with it. That was a professional camera, but on the fly. Yeah, that was on the fly, walking through a market. Oh, this first photo was in someone's condo, in their kitchen, and they're like, "I want this moody scene," so I set up a black backdrop, and they're like a fresh pasta restaurant. They didn't have their business open yet, so they're like, "We need to create some images, tell our story before we open." So I went to their apartment. I've done that many times actually. So don't you can do this for yourselves. You don't have to shoot all these images when you're on your truck. You can shoot them at home, in your backyard, on a table, with under something. Don't use that. You talking about a light box? Don't use that. The reason that is because a lot of products were shot that way in the past. It's an easy way to shoot a product. Like if you have a watch and you want it lit up really well. But that brings up a good point. The reason you don't want a light box for your photos is because there's no shadows. And a really good food photo has a lot of good photos in general have contrast. And contrast means a good amount of dark and a good amount of white. Light, so you have the full spectrum. If you don't have any shadows, then it's almost gray, and it's what's called flat. So you want contrast, and there's even a contrast slider in your editing app. It says contrast, and it'll basically, you know, like if I added more contrast to this colorful image, the shadows would be darker. Yeah, there's a lot to it, but you want good contrast, and you want shadows, and that's why going back to the hard light versus soft light, they're both good, but you want shadows. Another thing with editing, so you have exposure, white balance, and then you have saturation. Saturation is how strong are these colors, right? My frame of mind is I want natural, okay, maybe a little bit above natural. I don't. If you move that slider, that saturation slider too much, it's gonna look too red, too green. The lettuce is gonna be neon almost. You don't want that. Just just think to yourself, did my lettuce look like that? Does it glow? No. It just needs to look green. Okay? Cropping. Okay? 5 minutes? Okay. Try to blow through this real quick. Cropping. Again, crop for impact. You can crop, you can post, you can upload many different types of crops for, let's say, Instagram. You can do the square, you can do the wide, you can do the tall. If I was shooting photographing a person, I'd probably do the tall one. Okay, I wouldn't do square. Square might not look good. Think about what works for that photo, um, and don't include a lot of other BS. Two no-nos. Most don't turn your photos black and white unless it's a rare case that it's going to work. I think I have a salami picture on here that it works with black and white, but otherwise, you need to see color. Another no-no, it's a faux pas or it's an old trend, is called a selective color, where one thing is in color and everything else is black and white. Everybody's seen that, right? Don't do that. It rarely works and it looks dated. Keep it simple. If you need to know what works, pick up a magazine, pick up Bon Appetit, Savoir. A lot of times it's fairly simple. In the past, in the 80s, I was actually born in the 80s, so I've seen the whole trends. You had flowers in the background, all this other BS. Just keep it simple. Okay, I have a couple minutes. I'm going to blow through social media a little bit more. One big thing, remember that all these social media sites, you don't own those sites, okay? You, don't neglect your website should always be number one, because no one's going to take, your Instagram might crash. You might get hacked, and then boom. So always remember to make sure your website is still good, okay? Gosh. Another big trend, you guys, founder-led content. Founder-led is, yeah, it's cool to hire a social media person, but if you guys own the truck, talk about why you opened. Have a little video, and it doesn't have to be, have someone else hold it. Maybe buy a tripod. Founder-led. Talk about why you opened, why you had that dish, where you got the ingredients. People want to know because, especially this day and age with corporations and um, it's so awesome to see a face behind what's going on. Did I see a hand over here? Okay.